Uh, hopefully all of you are following the Mixed Company page so that you can share the video on your pages as well. Why isn't it going live?
It says we're live.
Does it?
Yep.
Oh. I see it. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, so we can give it a minute, see. We can give it a minute, see. All right. Excuse me. Welcome everybody to Mixed Company. It has been quite some time since we have been live on Facebook. We have definitely missed all of you, and we hope that you have missed us too. We have not been live since what, right? Spring of last year it was. But we are back. We are back tonight with a very special conversation that we feel that many of our viewers can relate to. A deep dive into the relationship between the Black church and millennials. So we are so excited to have this conversation. Please share this on your pages so that your friends and followers can also watch and join the conversation. My name is Monisa Mason, and I am the founder and one of the co-hosts of Mixed Company. We are happy to have you here today, and I will introduce my co-host, Ray. We'll let him introduce himself, actually. You're muted.
Ray Williams. I am a native Clevelander, current New Yorker. I am excited for the conversation. It has been a while. I just want to thank everyone on our panel for joining us tonight. And we will let the ladies introduce themselves next. Jasmine?
Hey, everybody. Jasmine Pope. What all am I introducing myself about? We going to the full intros?
Give us whatever you want to give us.
All right, Jasmine Pope. I am a licensed minister here in Toledo, Ohio. Born and raised in the church pretty much all of my life. Member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Thank you, Monisa and Ray, for the opportunity to be in Mixed Company and have this great conversation. You know, holy versus heathens. I'm ready for it.
I love that. We should have gave it that name. All right, Deja.
Hi, guys. I'm Deja. I'm from Canton, Ohio. I lived in Toledo for a while, which is how I met Mo and Jazz. I'm also a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. I currently live in Cleveland, and I do public health on the civilian side and the military side. I grew up in the church, and I'm currently in the space of trying to use my passion in relation to my God-given purpose. That's where I'm at.
All right. Mr. Joe Cross.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Cross. I'm originally from York, Alabama, a graduate of Alabama A&M University. You see it. And yeah, I am really looking forward to this conversation. And I'm glad to be here. So it's good to meet everybody.
Good to have you. Good to have you, Brother Marco.
What's going on, folks? I am Marco McNeil, the senior pastor at Early Grove Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, spent some time in Toledo as well, spent some time in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I am now in Memphis. Grateful for the opportunity to be on. There are a ton of other people that that I believe could be in this space, but I appreciate the opportunity and the invite to join in on the conversation.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here today. And I forgot to hit record, so I'm going to hit that good old record button real quick.
Awesome, good deal. And last but certainly not least, Brother Adrian.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. My name is Adrian Taylor. I'm actually from Mississippi stand up, the Bible Belt. You know what I'm saying? Grew up in the church. I am the CEO of Gentlemen's Council, a third of the Breaking Barriers podcast as well. I'm excited to be here, and this is a great topic. I hope some of my people are tuning in because they don't need to because they might not like what I got to say, especially my folks. So I don't know. But yeah, man, I'm excited to be here though.
Awesome. As you all are sharing these videos on your respective pages, if you see any of your friends adding comments or questions, please feel free to bring them to the group so that we can keep them engaged in the conversation. But we're gonna just dive right in, right? So everybody's here, we're ready, we're gonna get this conversation popping. So the first question that we have for you all is, what is your current relationship with the church? So anybody can start, or I could just call on someone. What is your current relationship with the church?
Yeah, it's easy for me to start. I'm in it. I'm the pastor and really looking to be a part of the solution to a myriad of different circumstances that involve the church. But yeah, I'm in it. I'm right in the thick of things.
I would piggyback off of that and say the same. I'm not a pastor, however, I'm a minister, been a licensed minister for 5 years. And so I think particularly for me in this time of COVID, post-COVID, whatever we want to call it, really found myself in a place of digging deeper into my faith and into the church. So it's been an interesting journey, at least for me, over these last few years.
All right.
Well, I guess I'll kick it off for the heathen group. I have no relationship with the church period. That's the end of the sentence. There is no, unlike a lot of people, there's no church hurt or quote unquote or anything like that. It's nothing like that for me. There is I have no real criticisms for those who are. In true Libra fashion, I am balanced across the scales. So I don't lean so much this way and I don't lean so much that way. But yeah, that's my relationship with the church.
Okay. Well, currently I don't really go to church. I may frequent every blue moon type deal, but that's typically because there's something going on there for me to go. I can't necessarily say as well that I have some type of hurt. I think that it was just, hey, we here to have this conversation. I think it was just some growth in me personally that swayed me from what the church had kind of been about in my eyes. And so I felt like it was a lot of fear mongering there. And it just, I don't know. I didn't feel like the messaging was for me. Also, growing up in the church, I felt like I disagree with a lot of interpretations of the Bible as well too, when I was sitting in, congregations as well. And of course, we know it's about God within yourself, you having that relationship with God. And so I started focusing more on that than actually going to church.
We gonna jump in, right? We gonna answer the question too?
I was gonna let Deja go.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Deja girl, my bad.
So my current relationship with church, I guess it's kind of like an infant learning like the world all over again. I feel like this is like my first real time in adulthood, like post college, post everything, like really sitting down and attempting to not just get back into brick and mortar church, but to also really like look at the church from like a human standpoint, and not so much like from that church hurt like perspective you were talking about, Joe, not from that perspective, but realizing that church is a hospital, from my perspective, for the broken and wounded. But also I'm learning to like fellowship with my fellow like brothers and sisters and lean on them to help me with my journey. And I'm also looking at the church now from a place of grace, and trying to really like focus on being like the genuine like example of grace that I want given to me to other people that I'm encountering, and trying to help them, not even help them, but realizing that I might be the only form of God that some people see, and trying to like get my life together and get my grace together and how I'm interacting with everyday people.
So I think I mirror some of Joe's and Adrian's sentiments, that I don't have a relationship with the church currently, but it hasn't always been that way. I grew up in the church. My grandfather is a Baptist preacher, but as I grew and started to look at things, not just religiously, but as a whole, with objectivity and with rationale, I just started to grow away from some of the things that were being taught. I do respect and appreciate the need for people to have something to believe in and something to be grounded in. And so that's why I'm not someone that you would ever hear bash the church, because I do think that the masses do need that sort of, they need that grounding, right? And so I do understand and appreciate that. But I also think that it's grossly arrogant of men to assume to know anything about the higher power. And that's kind of where I am in my journey for understanding, is why do you believe what you believe, right? And if I ask myself that question, I could never really come up with an answer to why I believe these things other than someone told me that I should.
Yeah, conditioning. A lot of conditioning. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut into the intros. Let's get past that first.
No, you're good. You're good. I think for me, when I hear that question, the first thing that comes to mind is I have a relationship with God. So for me, when I think about the relationship with the church, I think of all of the laws and the rules and all of the things that typically are attached to the church. But for me, it's about my relationship with God. I consider myself to be more relational than religious. And I think when we think about the church, it's religious. A lot of churches are very religious. And I think that's the aspect that turns a lot of people away from the church, is because of the religious aspect of it. So for me, it's about my relationship with God. Yes, I do go to church. I grew up in the church, but I just started going back to church on a regular basis within the past year. But at the end of the day, it's about my personal and intimate relationship with God, whether I'm in the church or I'm in my bedroom.
Heard. Joe, you want to go ahead and pick that point back up?
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, I am, I guess, what people would consider an intellectual. And it's not because I'm so smart or anything, but it's just my natural curiosity. I have questions about things. And I think to grow up in the church and be in the church 60 plus years and not be able to differentiate between the soul and the spirit, I think that religion was initially established to try and understand or get a grasp of concept for what spirit is. And I think that church has sort of veered away from that, not purposefully, but just no one, I feel like not enough people are truly seeking the answers outside of what you've been told. And I can even touch on that. The Bible is the only book, just from my experience, where there's no cross-referencing done, and cross-referencing is actually discouraged. And it's just little things like that for me. Just seeking truth. And in my life, I've grown to the point where I put truth over everything. And I think that everything should be grounded in truth. And I think if the truth is not known, there should be no shame in saying, I don't know. It's limitless potential in I don't know. It's limitless space to learn and truly grasp. But as soon as you have it all figured out, your learning pretty much stops there. And it gets regurgitated and recycled, and the same messages, it get remixed 1 or 2 times by a couple different DJs and put out there. That's just my take on it. But again, to echo Ray's sentiment, I do feel that there is a need and a place for the church. I just think it's all about where that individual is in their own personal spiritual journey.
Thank you, Joe. Jasmine?
Yeah, so you brought up a really good point as far as, and I feel like I grew up in this way earlier in my church experience where we were taught you couldn't question God, you couldn't ask certain things. And as I've grown, one, just personally in my relationship with God, before there's ever any titles or positions or anything like that, I've learned that you can question, you can ask questions directly to God. The questioning is like in being doubtful, right, of who and what God is, but you can always go to him and ask questions. I think the second part of that is pastors, leadership, not wanting to be questioned, to not seem dumb or as if they don't know. And I think that was an old mindset that was developed, or an older generation. But I know particularly with a lot of the pastors, my pastor that I actually sit under, and then other pastors that I'm connected to, if I had a question, I actually did it today. A client came to me and was like, 1 Corinthians 7:12 says this, and I think it means this for my marriage. And I was like, whoa, hold up. Let me not even go into answering that question until I talk to my wise counsel and get some better understanding, because this is something that I don't know totally, or I'm not familiar with. So I'm always asking questions and learning and growing and, all of those different things, but knowing, just a little bit, you talked about being in the South and that type of church. I can see where that, comes into play, but I think more and more pastors are coming out of that, particularly with the availability of knowledge and resources that are out there. And so, I just hope that we will continue to grow and develop and see that, yes, we all have our own truth, so to speak, but there is that opportunity to ask questions and get that further knowledge and the things that you feel like you don't understand.
So, does anyone else want to make a point to that before I ask a follow-up question? So just, I guess a part of the disconnect for me comes from just a lack of understanding of a few fundamental things. For example, the Bible. When we speak about the Bible being the word of God, I struggle with that for a couple of reasons. One, because it was written and translated by men, right? And then the other piece of it is that if we, a lot of times, religious people like to separate religion from history, and you just can't do that.
And science.
And science. And if we look at it from a historical perspective, right, then we're saying that there was one version or writing of the Bible, we'll call it, the Old Testament, And if it's the word of God, then it should be perfect and it shouldn't need to be revised, right? And that's just, and very, very basically, just that really doesn't make sense to me, that the word of God would need to change with the time, right? Like for me, it seems that if the word of God was written by God, who's an omnipresent, omniscient, all-knowing being, then there would be no need for revision, right? And so that speaks to the point of it being written by men, and then as man changes, then man changes that book to fit the things that men need now. And so that's just one of the fundamental things that I struggle with is, like, why doesn't Jesus have a book of the Bible? If we're saying that this is the word of God, this is the Son of God, he walked with these men who, have these books that they wrote, where's the book that Jesus wrote? And I know that there are varying denominations and varying interpretations of all of these things. And it's just odd to me that there would need to be any doubt when God says something, because he would make it plain.
Okay, Deja had her hand up.
So when you're speaking to revision of the Bible, are you saying like whereas like there was a New Testament created as opposed to the Old, or are you speaking to like the books that were like left out of the Bible? Like are you like
I'm speaking New Testament versus Old Testament. So
Okay.
essentially, the Torah, which is fundamentally the first testament. I mean the Old Testament, right? And it's what Jewish people still read today, right? Christianity doesn't begin until Christ comes. So everything that predates Christ, what do we call that? And so it's I have my own issues with Judaism, but that's not a conversation here, right? So it's just the I guess the lack of congruency, right? And just things not lining up and things not adding up, and really not having any answer for it other than the new covenant. Like that just doesn't make sense to me. If God was telling us that this is the word, like, it would be plain, it would be perfect, and we wouldn't need to revise it. At least that's what I think. And that's why I'm glad that we have you guys on the panel that are far more astute on the topic than I am to be able to speak to it.
But remember, Ray, his ways are not our ways. Okay, so I'm sorry. Go ahead. Y'all, you guys go
Well,
ahead.
I was gonna say, I get into the history and stuff, but I would like, and he smiling, so I think he knows. I would like the Reverend Doctor to go into that a little bit before I try to tap into it.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm one that, as you will notice through this conversation, that just kind of sits back and absorbs before I start, spitting out whatever information that I feel like I might have. But I think one of the fundamental mistakes that some of us make is that we make the Bible our God. And it then goes back into the relationship that I think Bonisa spoke about between religion and relationship. And that your relationship, I believe, should trump your religion. And that's just my vantage point. That's what, I tell the people of my church, of the Lord's church, is that if you are coming here out of some ritualistic behavior, versus coming together with a bunch of who you believe to be like-minded individuals coming to worship an audience of one, if you have come here to clap your hands when the organ starts or when you start to get happy when I'm preaching, then you've come for the wrong reasons. And I think that we need to honor that, and we need to have that conversation in that space. in knowing that, yeah, I'm the pastor, but I'm not your God. You're not here to worship me. You're not here to serve me. I am here as a vessel to better serve and to rightly divide what I believe to be God's word and interpretation, and do that to the best of my ability with God's help. Um, I don't believe that when I stand to preach that I'm an island unto myself. That there is a power, there is a spirit that is working on the same thing that I am working on, and the same way that I may say one particular thing, it may hit Joe one way, it may hit Adrian a totally different way. Same message, but it's something different for everyone. And I think we get in trouble when we tend to confuse God's messengers as God's message. And the moment where we begin to intertwine and tangle those two, I think that that's when we get into trouble, and we lead to things like Joe said of church hurt, which is a very real thing. But I am one that just believes that the church can't be absolved of some of the things that it has done and has said in the future, and we need to honor that and own that space.
A funny story real quick, if I may. One day, a young lady and I was having a conversation, and I casually mentioned that I am a believer in God, by the way. So I'm not all the way heathenistic, but I just casually mentioned that, I'm a believer, a strong believer in God, but I don't necessarily believe everything that's written in the Bible. And this girl could not conceive of that notion. I mean, to her, it was almost like God was the Bible. So, just to piggyback off what you said, Marco, I'm sorry, that there are people who worship the pastor, but there are people who worship the Bible as well. And what do you guys think about that? Is that supposed to be that way, or no? Because she could not wrap her mind around the fact that I believed in God, but not necessarily everything that's in the Bible.
Yeah, so one of my things that that literally broke me out of that mentality was in seminary. I was getting my master's degree, and I had a particular professor that stood up at the front of the class and took the Bible and chucked it at the wall, and it caught us all off guard. And I'm just like, what are you doing? And then he takes the Bible, he picks it up, he dusts it off, he closes it back up, and then he stands on it in front of the classroom. And then he said, if this offends you, then the Bible is your God. So at what point do you begin to look at your relationship with what the Bible says? Because I do believe that the Bible is a mode of encouragement that the Lord has given man, and man has tried to do their best to interpret what they feel like God is telling them. But at what point do we just kind of, begin to look at, our relationship with God versus what we believe other men and women have said and have preached down through the generation? And I think we need to take a good look at that. We need to take a good look at our religions, because there's some people, that will raise holy hands on Sunday, but will raise holy hell Sunday night. People used to say Monday, no, it's Sunday night.
Yeah.
Walking out the church.
Oh yeah. Yeah. As soon as they get to the parking lot. Jazz, you already know.
Yeah, all day, every day. I think, when we do a lot of focusing on the Bible as the only means, but one of the things that I've seen throughout the years is, and one of the things, and I can only talk about my church experience because I'm in my church every Sunday, right? But we are getting back to a place where worship of God and building that relationship and that intimacy with him is the focus. Yes, my pastor, or whoever is preaching is prepared with a word, but if God says, hey, nah, just be in this vein of worship, giving me honor, giving me glory, leaving your burdens and your cares here, then that's what it needs to be. I think a lot of times we get so caught up in format, we get caught up in the programs, we get, as Marco was talking about, you got to clap your hands at this point, you got to wait till the organ hits that certain note before you get up. And it's like, that's not God, that's us. That's us as people, right? And so being able to take that step back and say, nah, God, I want an intimate relationship with you. And even if that comes with being in the church where there are some who don't see you in the same light as I do, I'm here because I know I need to be.
So just, and I don't mean to be inflammatory, right? But a lot of times when I speak to people about placing the, how can I put it? We can essentially credit anything for the goodness that happens to us, right? Like it's idolatry, if you will, right? So let's say like this brush, right? Like I got a new job and it's because of this brush, right? Like if I believe that this brush is the reason for that, right? Like then I'm putting my faith into that. And my point behind that is that we can attest the things, we can attest it to whatever we want to, and God is who we attest it, or what we attest it to, for lack of understanding for what that is. That's my belief, right? Like God is or what we call God. Some people call it the universe. It's how we try to rationalize through our limited understanding of what this is, or who this is, and so that to me speaks to the fact that God might not be for me or to me who it is to you or to someone else, right? And so that's why I struggle with organized religion that tells me who or what God should be, right? Because if we're talking about my personal relationship with God, you don't know what that is for me, right? And I'm sorry, I don't mean you directly to anyone here, but just in a general sense.
There's a saying, and I won't overtake, but I believe what I believe, and I won't let anybody change what I believe, right? I know what I believe about God. I know what I believe about his word. And I won't let anybody change that in the sense where it's causing me to do something that, or believe in something that goes against that, right? So I don't do a whole lot of the debate about that, because like you said, for me, God is a healer. He's a way maker. But for you, he might be your comforter. For you, he might be something else. Who am I to say that the God that is the healer for me is deeper than the God that is the comforter for you? Right. There's many facets of that, but I know what I believe. So if you believe in that hairbrush, it's not my job to argue with you and say, yo, that hairbrush ain't it, dog. Like, you need to come over this way. You need to come over to death row, right? Like, you need to be on this side with me. As a believer, it's my job to live right. And as I live right and you see my example, then even if you don't per se cross the line to come over this way, you can at least say, yo, Jazz believed in Jesus and she really lived that life.
Well, then we get into the subjectivity of what's right, like, because then we're talking about right and wrong, and no one killed more people in the Bible than God did.
Or maybe it's right according to what she believes, right? Not necessarily right is in what I believe is right and what you believe is wrong, but
which makes it subjective. And again, that's just, there's so much gray area, right? I saw this meme and it said, it's Jesus knocking at the door, and it said, "Let me in." And he said, "Why?" It says, "So I could save you." And it said, "From what?" And it says, "From what I'm gonna do if you don't let me in," right? And it's like this notion of like what it's God that's going to send us to hell if we don't believe these certain things. Like, and that's a struggle for me.
It's coercion, but It's coercion. But the thing about it is, someone who's, deeply rooted in the word will tell you that it's not really God who's doing this to you. You're doing it to yourself by not believing. And then for me, it just opens up an entirely different subject. We have to look at belief. What is belief? Right? Do you believe you have a mother and a father? Or do you know? And we find that when you know something for sure, belief becomes obsolete. And I'm not crashing on anybody's belief system. I'm not even telling people not to believe. Do what thou wilt. But I think we have to be honest in understanding that belief isn't necessarily the truth. Belief in itself is what I'm saying. It's not necessarily the truth in all cases. So we have to kind of question, what is belief? If we knew, would there even be a reason for belief? Do you believe that which you already know is what I'm saying. So I don't know. That's just a whole nother, this is just how I think, about spirituality. And I think personally, it's an individual journey. And you'll find that the more you seek truth outside of traditional means, the more you find yourself by yourself. And that's just what it is.
Joe, I want to piggyback on something. Sorry, Monisa. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to those of you that are just joining, welcome to Mixed Company. We are doing a deep dive into the Black church and millennials. So I just want to say welcome to those of you that are in the room. We see you in the comment section. We see your feedback. We see your questions. Keep them coming. Please continue to share this so that your other friends and family members can participate in the conversation. And I'm going to hand it back over to you, Marco. Then after you, we're going to move on to another question.
Okay, sounds good. Joe, I was going to piggyback on what Joe said and partially agree, because I think our belief is individualistic, because we are all at different levels in life. We are all on different journeys, different faith walks, whether you believe or don't believe, or whether you believed at one point in time and don't believe now. We're all on, these different journeys. And I think it's time for us to, one, have conversations like this, but then also give people the space to believe what they want to believe, and to those who don't want to believe what they don't want to believe. And that's kind of where I am. And the same thing that, Jasmine kind of said earlier. The church for a long time has been the heavyweight champion of Bible beating. And I say that with very deep conviction. I've said it to my church on a number of occasions. But the moment that I can look at you and say, okay, you may not believe, that's cool. But in my belief and under my understanding, you're a child of God, and I'm going to respect you as such. But the moment that my witness does not show what I believe and what I teach and what I preach, I think that's when it becomes called into question. And I think that's why we have many of the issues on people in church and out of church now, is because, we've put a lot of weight into that center chair in the pulpit. As a matter, in our church, I don't even sit in the pulpit, because what am I gonna do? Have you sitting up there just looking at me the whole time until I stand up and preach? No. We have to get out of that mindset and understand that everybody in the church, whether it's 300 people or 3,000 people or 30,000 people, we're all on a different walk, and we should all be able to say, God is ... You fill in the blank, and allow people that space to fill in the blank. Don't leave your brain at the doorstep of the church and allow church to play on your emotions. No, bring your thinking mindset into the church, because I know for a fact, when I'm standing there preaching, I got people like this Googling, is what he said, is that, oh, okay, that looks right. And we have to honor that, and pastors have to be okay with having those conversations and also being okay with what Joe said before. It's okay to say, I don't know. But when I don't know, I will go and find out.
So one thing that I can appreciate about this conversation that really speaks to the overarching topic, which is our experience as millennials as it relates to the Black church, is a lot of things that we're talking about are things that we experience growing up in the church. So even when we talk about witnessing and what that looks like for us at our age looks totally different than what we were taught growing up in church and what that should look like. When it comes to showing grace and love and mercy, you see a lot of people, like you said, Bible thumping when we were growing up, that would literally argue back and forth with people about their belief. And so my next question for the group is, what was your experience growing up in the church? And even now as an adult, how do you perceive that experience?
So I went to a real bougie church in Cleveland.
Don't say the name.
I won't, but there were lawyers and doctors and the well-to-do people of Cleveland. There was really no shouting. People got spirited from time to time, but I do appreciate that. The sort of intellectual approach to preaching, having a pastor that knew the text well enough, to be able to dissect it in a way that was digestible for young me, right? And so that was invaluable for me. Like I love my pastor and his successor. Again, it was just the growth in me as a man that started to question certain things, just regular things like picking and choosing which parts of the Bible we want to follow, right? Like we want to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, but we go to church on Sunday, right? Like that's a fundamental thing in the Bible that we just ignore, and so it's just little things like that just bother me. I won't call it hypocrisy because sometimes institutions are bigger than the individual, and we just have to go along with the way that things are or the way that things always have been. But just small things like that, to where we can pick and choose the parts that we want to agree with and follow, the people that we want to accept and allow into church, and those that we want to shun for particular transgressions, and those that we want to excuse for others.
So I know for me, so I'm gonna be very transparent with you guys and whoever's watching. If y'all go to my church back home, it is what it is. But the church that I grew up in back in Cleveland, one thing that I really realized was, being young and impressionable, and your family telling you got to be a part of the dance ministry, or you got to do all these different things, and you feel like you just have to do it. And so for me, I do feel like when I look back to especially like my middle school, teen years and high school, I do feel like I was forced to do a lot of things. I was forced to speak tongues. It wasn't something that naturally came from me. Somebody was like, they were trying to like really get us as teenagers to like force us to speak tongues, force us to feel the Holy Spirit. And I remember when I went off to college, my freshman year of college, I got my tongue pierced. I'm 18, 19 years old. I'm in college. I'm living my life. I come back to church back home, and one of the elders pulled me in the back room and made me take my tongue ring out. She said, "This is not acceptable. This is not what we do." And that really did something to me. I didn't know how to feel about that. And then even when I think about when I got pregnant, I felt like I had to have the baby because what is the church gonna say? Like every decision that I made was based off of my experiences growing up in church, because I feel like I grew up where you have to be perfect and you have to do all these things and you have to make certain decisions. And so I feel like a lot of my decisions in, high school and my early 20s were based off of how are they going to feel back home at church? How is my family going to feel? How is my pastor going to feel? How are the elders going to feel? And so, it didn't really dawn on me until a recent conversation with a friend where I really started to unpack that. And I was like the church really had a huge influence on my mindset and my decision making. And it was just like a wow, like a mind-blowing moment for me at my big age of almost 38 years old, that I just realized that they had such an impact on my decision making. And looking back, it's not cool. Simply, it's just not cool. It doesn't affect my relationship with God and how I view the church, but it definitely was one of those things that I kind of really just had to sit with it for a second and really think about how that really impacted me in my early 20s. Marco?
Yeah, so it's two things that you said that I kind of am a little bit more interested in, and think that there needs to be a level of repentance when it comes to the church and some of the things of the past that we have done. One of them is my ability. I was raised by my mother, who is much older. Well, was older when she had me. She was 45 when she had me. And I have siblings. My oldest brother is 21 years older than me. I have a sister that passed away. That was 19 years older than me, and my brother was 17 years older than me, but he went off to prison when I was 6. So I had the ability to ask questions at a very early age. When they said children need to, be quiet and go sit down when grown folks are talking, no, I was invited to the table. And I was allowed to ask my questions. So the level of experience that I had in the church is not one that is very similar to other individuals my age, because my mother had already had a 21-year head start, on raising kids, and realized, okay, wait a minute, maybe something that I didn't do with the first 3, I'm gonna do different with this one. And that was allowing me very much so into those conversations. But secondly, Monisa, it really grieves me to hear about your experience with the tongue ring, because it's been many other things that I believe that some of our elders have done that we just don't know about, and that got passed over, or because theirs was not as public as a tongue ring, it was never talked about. One example, I'll leave the church out of it. I won't say any names either, but one of the things that caused me to question, at an early age, was when a young woman got pregnant and they brought her up to the front of the church, and it was just like, yo, y'all know she didn't do this by herself. And secondly, why you putting out her family business in front of everybody for everybody to know? I mean, we was going to eventually find out, but it ain't nobody else's business. So it's things like that that I think that leads us to where we are now as some millennials being away from the church, is because, quite frankly, let me choose my words carefully. We've seen so much stuff happen that, it caused us to just be like, yo, this don't make no sense. So the relationship that I have with God now is a relationship that has been cultivated since I was in high school. And when I got to college, it was like, yo, I know God for myself. So if I want to run to Mount Zion, or if I want to run to Indiana Baptist Church in Toledo, Ohio, I can do that on my own volition, not because somebody's calling my phone on Sunday morning, why you ain't in church? Well, I ain't got no car. How am I gonna get there? It's things like that that I think the church needs to, begin to have some more dialogue about. And I think some pastors need to be honest and say, I've done that too. Monisa's mine wasn't a tongue ring, but it was a tattoo. And after I explained why I got the tattoo, I went and got several more.
Thank you for that, Marco. Adrian and then Deja.
Yeah, so it's funny, and I don't want to leave what you just said, Monisa, but it's crazy how they try to make us have perfection in Christianity when they had kids out of wedlock, when The pastor probably was sleeping with a few women in the congregation. All of these different things that were going on. But as the children, they try to make us have perfection in our faith and in our walk. I digress. But yeah, so on myself, I grew up in the church and I did a lot. So I was in the choir, I was on the usher board, I mimed, I was on the drill team. So when I tell y'all I was in church all the time, I'm not lying. I was in church all the time. I learned a lot. I learned how to, recite the books of the Bible, all of that. I know the Bible. Um, I grew up in church. I'm from the Bible Belt. I'm one of those kids. And I say that to say, I can't remember a time that I really even cared about church like that. I went because I had to. If I didn't have to go, I wouldn't have went. Um, and that was pretty much my walk all the way, up and through high school. And as I became an adult, it was extremely hard for me. Um, because there were things that I wanted to do, but apparently I couldn't do, or I wasn't supposed to do, right? I'm 21. I feel some kind of way about having a drink because that's not what we're supposed to do, right? I feel some way about going to the club because that's not what we're supposed to do. And I literally struggle with that extremely, extremely hard into my adulthood that it was messing with my mind a little bit. It was. I felt like a heathen. I felt like something was wrong with me because I wanted to do these things. I'm a good person, but me wanting to do these quote unquote things, these worldly things, is kind of making me a bad person. And so I continue to go to church, and I don't know why. I would. It got to the point I was like literally forcing myself to go to church, and I said, "Why are you, bro? Like, why are you going to church?" I don't know, because I'm supposed to. I only went to church because I thought I was supposed to. Nothing else. I thought if I didn't go to church, I was going to hell. So I made myself go to church to where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to church twice a month. I started like slowly but surely not going to church as much. And even when I stopped, I felt some kind of way. And it wasn't me going to church like I'm getting something out. Because I'm going to tell you, I can't remember the last time I really was getting anything out of church. I'm sitting in church and I'm daydreaming the whole time. I started trying to find churches that only go 30 to 45 minutes so I can get up out of there. I'm not going to them Southern Baptist churches no more. It's crazy. You got me messed up. Even still, I'm like, what am I doing in here? I don't want to be here. So I finally told myself, it's okay, bro. You've been told your whole life, you stray away, eventually you come back, right? See if you miss it. See if you walk away from it and then come back. I walked away at 25, I want to say, and probably after 25, I'll probably been to church 5 times since then. I actually have absolutely no desires. Too much drama, too much mess. It's just way too much. It's too judgy, and of course we know not every single church is like that. Hmm, I s- hmm, hmm, but I'm good on it. I done churched out. I think God loved me enough that if church was the premise to get into heaven, I'm there. I'm good. I did it enough between the ages of 0 to 25.
Deja and then Joe. Thank you, Adrian.
Hi, friends. So drawing from a couple of you guys, the hypocrisy, somebody quickly mentioned it. So for me, as a child, and then like growing up to where I am now, there was a point in my walk or relationship with the church where I took the confusion of the understanding that there are things as a child that adults do that you don't really know about. Like say your parents smoke and drink, but they hide that from you because you're a child. Like transitioning from childhood to adulthood and seeing eventually everything that the adults were doing behind the closed doors. It was like, for me, it was like my whole life was just a lie. And I took it all for it being the church. Like, oh, I can't believe these people are all hypocrites. Da 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 da. Sorry, y'all, if you're watching. I mean, God bless you. But I'm like, oh, they're hypocrites. And then like now I'm coming from a place where I'm understanding like they're humans at the end of the day. our sins or whatever just look different from each other. But also I had to remember, like, I was a child. Like, they're not going to be doing everything in front of me as a child. So like, I had to come from that standpoint. I also I call it a latchkey church kid, because no one forced my hand to go to church. My mother, however, worked. She's a working woman to this day. She should be retired, and she's a working woman, y'all. But with that being said, she worked second shift and third shift. If we know anything about second shift and church, that's the whole day and the whole night. I'm a mere second grader, third grader. I gotta eat, I gotta do homework, I gotta do these things. Where are the responsible people? Oh, they're at church. Where is the dinner? Oh, it's at church. Let me join praise dance. Let me join usher board. Now, granted, my mom did put that foundational love for the church, and I did have and do have a strong foundational love for God and a natural desire to serve. But I was in church for the latchkey of it. So I was in there 24/7. And with that being said, somebody decision making, it affected their decision making and their convictions and whatnot. Y'all, like I said, I came from like old school, deep rooted back in the day Pentecostal church where you wear skirts and you don't come in the sanctuary if you don't got on a skirt or a dress. You sit in the back of the church. Okay. You sit in the back of the church, you don't come. And I would have anxiety trying to get ready for church as a child. Like, oh my gosh, I don't have a clean jean skirt. Oh my gosh, I've been to church 4 times this week and I only got 2 jean skirts. Oh my gosh, I can't go to church. Oh my God, God is not gonna love me like this. I can't go like this. God, I'm not approved to go to church. And now looking back, I realized that that played like such a huge, like, unhealthy, like, I guess that was not a healthy relationship. I shouldn't have anxiety to go to church. I should be coming as I am. And I feel like, the masses are like, we've had this big awakening and we're more so moving to that. The young folks, the millennials, you show up in pants. It's a normal thing. But back then for me, it was not. And like I said, that put a strain, like, as I was moving into adulthood and realizing the certain things, the convictions that I would have. I felt bad for like being a normal like college kid. Like, I remember like dabbling in makeup for the first time, and I went back on a break back to my church, and somebody see me and pulled me aside like, what are you doing with that red lipstick on? You're not supposed to wear red lipstick. And I felt like a harlot. I'm like, hey, well, let me go to the bathroom and wipe off my lipstick. I ain't go back to church, I think, for the whole year. I'm like, you know what? I'm good. I'm good. On top of that, with the behind closed doors things, like back then also, well, with the world, homosexuality, the people being on the spectrum and different things, like, and just different cultures of sins, I noticed were like, it was like, these sins are not okay, but these sins are. When in reality, it's just like, none of these sins are okay. We're all these like wounded people, or whatever the case may be. We are all deserving of God's grace. We're all deserving of this. It was just so much from then to now that I feel like it is starting to change, and there's this big cultural shift. But y'all, like, it had me in a doozy, where to this day, like, I'm, like I said, for the first time, really rebuilding my relationship from an adult lens, and understanding, I don't know, understanding that just because someone is in church, it doesn't mean that they are perfect. And it doesn't mean that they got all the answers either. Like, they trying to figure it out just like I am. And I was putting people on pedestals when in reality, they trying to figure it out too. They don't got all the answers. And I'm learning that. And that's okay. But that's where I'm at.
Thank you for that, Deja. Joe, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think what we're hearing here is a lot of trauma. a lot of trauma that was developed, unfortunately, in the church. For me, I was born with the gift of singing. So, okay, so I grew up in, I'm from York, Alabama. It's already a small town, but the church I actually attended was even smaller than that. And it was a very old school traditional church, Baptist church, where, we sung old Negro spirituals, and we still had the mornings bench. I don't know, maybe I'm dating myself. Do they still do that now? The mornings bench? Nobody knows what I'm talking about, huh? Okay, so the mornings bench is where they're
I know exactly what you're talking about, but I haven't seen a mourner's bench in a while.
I grew up in the mornings bench. Okay, so basically what this is children who have not profess that Christ is their savior, right? They make them sit on the front pew. Kids line up on the front pew. And this is during revival, by the way. And at some point, the minister or the pastor would come down and parade in front of the kids and ask them, are you ready to step off the bench? And that would be your introduction or your prelude to baptism. So that's how it was when I was, wow, I'm sounding real old right now. When I was coming up, that's how it was when I was coming up. So, so there's that, but I just think that there's some wiring done in church. There's a lot of fear. For me, my trauma came with the shouting, right? I'm in a Southern church. Yeah, they lit. So I don't want to sit by nobody who's gonna swing and hit me in my face. And now we're at homecoming program or the pastor's anniversary, and these strangers are walking in church. I don't know who the shouter is. So I'm literally having to wait till everybody sit down just so I can sit somewhere because I am terrified of a sudden scream as a kid. As a kid, I'm terrified, right? As I got older, it just became comedy, but that trauma was built. It was developed, and that's the type of environment I grew up in, and it was traditional. And that's one thing about Black people, whether the tradition is good or bad for us, we will stick to a tradition. And I remember, my mother, she still asks me to this day, Andre, when you gonna take these children, when you gonna take your kids to church? And one day she said, when are you gonna take your kids to church? Don't you want them to go to heaven? And it just did something to me. Like, it's the relationship between, or our belief between attending church and actually getting into heaven. And I'm saying to myself, this is conditioning, right? This is real conditioning here. Like, I'm looking at, I don't want to say brainwashing because that has negative connotations, but we are trained in certain ways, but it's real traditional, and it's sort of like when I said I don't eat beef or pork anymore. You still get in a Black family that barbecue all the time, you're going to get the same reaction, like, who are you right now? You know what I mean? So yeah, that's how I grew up. Real Southern Baptist. And, I grew up in the choir, youth choir director, playing the piano, singing every program, leading almost every song, and much like Adrian said, I never felt it. It was something that I had to do. And even today, sometimes my mother would invite me to come home and sing, because they have a program or something that she wants to put me on. And I just eventually just stopped doing it because it's like, I feel like I'm up here faking in front of these people. You know what I mean? My relationship with God is different. I connect with God through meditation. So it's a very much a solo sport for me. But, you know, that's just me.
So I saw we got a couple hands up. So I'm gonna let Jasmine go because I have a question, but it'll kind of pivot the conversation. So I'm gonna let Jasmine and Marco go. And I think Ray had a comment as well. And then we're gonna kind of pivot to some other questions.
So for me, I think my church experience has been a lot different. I don't mind sharing my home church. I love my home church. So I'm from Sandusky, Ohio. Many of y'all probably know it as Cedar Point, America's rock and roller coast. But anyway, grew up New Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church. Love my church, love my upbringing. I was invited as a young child. I was choir director over multiple choirs, praise dance, mime, taught Sunday school, whatever they needed. And even still to this day, I could do it or would do it, right? Had a pastor that taught well. I have a cousin who is now an elder in the church, but she was over our Christian education. And so she really taught me the importance of not just coming to church, but being able at a young age to read and study the Bible and know how to appropriately divide the word of truth as I was teaching or speaking and all of that different type of stuff. If I did wrong, I was corrected, but I was corrected in love. It was never something that was put out on Front Street or anything of that nature. So once again, completely different experience. For me, it wasn't until adulthood that the questions, the deeper questions, the maybe I don't necessarily even want to call it trauma, but and I don't like calling it church hurt, but really seeing the real side of people in church, right? I think a lot of things in my home church, because I was young, I was sheltered from. Even though I got to, I could go in my pastor's office every Sunday and sit in there while they had conversations, and I would get to pray and do all of those different types of things. I got to travel across the country with my pastor and our church as a whole to conventions and have great experiences and all of that. But coming to a different city where you don't know anybody, or the few people that you know is small in comparison to being in this great crowd of people that you don't know who to connect with, don't know the church scene and all of that. That was where my real journey and struggle came into play. And so it's been in these last, I would say probably 10 or so years of really finding who I was as a person, and then finding my space and where God saw fit to place me and to be working in things there. And so in this process, because I am the outsider, so to speak, I don't have any family besides now my husband and my children in my church, right? I've got to deal with people who don't know me, who don't like me, who never got a chance to know me to say whether they could or could not like me, right? But you form this opinion of me.
I'm sorry, those people are in church that you're speaking of?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh. People who can know this much about you, but stretch it this far and this wide, you know what I'm saying? Like having to grow and figure out, I'm but this big, right? I can't help how my body is, but having to deal with, like Deja talked about, the anxiety of, now as a grown woman, what do I wear to church? Because if I wear a certain style of dress, now I'm being too attractive to men. If I do a certain thing, I'm enticing men, or I'm not doing all of these things. So it's been in this space of my life where I really had to say, okay, God, why am I here? What does this mean for me? Because I've known since I was a young girl that there's a call on my life. I've known that I'm meant to do certain things, but God, you sending all these people in my space that's really, really getting to me. It was very, and I've said this publicly in my church, it's on YouTube, but I think it was almost 2 years ago, I told my pastor, I was like, my resignation letter is ready. I still believe, I love God, I ain't walking away from the faith, but I will sit at home and watch Jamal Bryant or TD Jakes or whoever before I come into this space and endure all of this, because it's messing with me mentally. I have at one time had PTSD about going to church. When I got ready to turn on the street, I'm anxious and wondering why I'm there. You know what I mean? But I say all of that to say is that even with all of that that has gone on, I had to come face to face with the real God that I serve, because I was looking too much at the people or what they thought about me or whatever the case that was, and say, okay, God, no, it's this is me and you. Whatever this is has to be for us. I'm willing to do that, and I'm willing to set everything else aside. And so I think that just all this kind of comes together to speak that we've all had our own journeys in this thing, right? We've all had those spaces where there's something that has made us question why and ultimately brought us here, right? Because it's not even just like, oh, we're Black millennials and talking about the church. Like, we're talking about our lives, our experiences, right? And whoever's watching this can learn from each one of us, right? Whether it's about continuing to go to church, if it's staying at home and watching Mike Todd or whoever on your computer or on your big TV screen. Like, I think it's all just to say we all have our own personal journey. And as long as you can find the meaning in the space of what your journey is, that's the ultimate thing.
Joe? No, I'm sorry, Mark. I think it was Mark. I'm sorry.
Yeah, man, I had a whole lot to say. I'm not gonna say it all, so I'm just gonna kind of cut across the field here. One of the things that Joe talked about, and Jasmine mentioned it about the trauma. I don't think trauma necessarily, I think it sits with us, but it doesn't come from us. I think a lot of this stuff has been passed down from generation to generation, and we have just decided to be the ones that say, you know, the few of us decided to be the ones to speak out and say, no, 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 I'm not doing that. You know, and we have that issue there that needs to be addressed, and how just some things just flat out don't make sense. And then there was one, it's a comment that Ray said, I'm not sure if everybody can see it or whatnot, but I will gladly say it, and I feel like I have to say it. If I am going to assist the church in being part of the changes, it's not just church, it's cultural society everywhere, and that is patriarchy is everywhere. And if I don't stand up in my full manhood of who I am as a cisgendered Black man, and stand up for sisters that have been done wrong, both inside and outside of the church, then I myself cannot lay down next to my wife at night. I cannot look at my two beautiful Black daughters and say, no matter what, daddy has your back, if I see what is happening to my sisters and I'm not saying anything. Now, I am not one that knows everything about the womanist theological movement. I'm not one that knows everything about history and all of that has been undertaken by the church, but I am one that will say part of that repentance that I spoke about earlier with the church, a lot of that has to be reckoned with, specifically on how we have treated women in the past. And in some churches, how we treat women now. And that's the unfortunate truth. And that's something that we have to live with, we have to sit with, but we have to figure out how do we change that going forward. Because to hear you say you have, you know, anxiety about what you're going to wear to church, I don't have anxiety about what I wear to church. You know, so now being senior pastor, being leader, you know, I don't want to hear about any of those conversations, because if you're not going to say anything to him, don't say anything to her. And as a matter of fact, don't say nothing to nobody. How about that? Because I seen you in the airport with your bonnet on too. You know, so if she want to come to church with a bonnet on, or if she want to come to church with a pencil skirt on and she's shapely, then let her do what she's going to do. Just be happy at the fact that they are there. And we have lost the notion of, at our church, we have commission groups. Our commission groups, our goal is to carry out the Great Commission. And we have been so focused on folks coming that we forgot it was our mandate to go. And when we forget that it's our mandate to go, nobody's going to go if you are living in a glass house. the first thing you're going to try to do is get yourself together so that when you go, your witness says that, hey, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, but let's try to all figure this thing out while we're doing life here together on earth. And if life meets us in eternity together, great. If you choose to come, great. I just want to make sure that you got a relationship. That's my only thing. And that's what I tell our people. We want to connect disciples, we want to make disciples, but we're not going to force people to come to church. If they come, great. But if they don't, that don't mean I'm not going to pray for you. It doesn't mean that because you're in the same sex relationship, that I'm not going to pray for you, that I don't care about you, that I don't want to see you do well. No, and I think we got to get out of that mindset, man. We got to break some of the things that we have been taught and that have been passed down from generation to generation. Jasmine said intergenerational tension. Part of my doctoral thesis was on intergenerational relationships as it pertains to ministry, how all generations can work together cohesively to move the church forward.
I just wanted to touch on a couple of things, Mo, before you move on. We have this obsession with classification, right? People, instead of just eating more vegetables, will have to say, "Oh, I'm a vegetarian," right? Like they have to say, "Oh, I'm a vegan," right? Like there's no need to classify yourself as something. And even in the church, like you got to be a Christian, right? You can't just read the Bible. Like you can't, just like walk in a certain way. Like you have to believe in your heart and speak with your mouth, like, and it's all or nothing. And so I do think that is a cultural thing that can be shifted, because if people are willing to look and to read and to study and to understand things without necessarily wanting that commitment, I think that should be okay, right? And that's not something that we do. I went to lunch with one of my homegirls a few years ago, and this is like where this thought came from. We were at a burger place, and she ordered all veg, and I said, "Oh, you're a vegetarian?" She said, "No," and I was like, I was so confused, right? Like it just wasn't something that I had ever considered, that someone who just decides to eat vegetables with some of their meals. And I think that once we get outside of having to classify everyone as something, you're a heathen, you're a Christian, you're a this or you're a that, I think then we can start to accept people for who they are and start to move towards a place really of just harmony and love for our fellow man.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I realized, like growing up so heavy in the Pentecost church and then joining into a Seventh-day Adventist family. I realized my ties to a specific denomination on how I choose to serve God wasn't that important to me. Like that's yeah. I won't go into it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of banging in the church. You got the east, you got this side of that side, and it's like if you ain't, because I've seen this. If you don't believe exactly what I believe, then obviously your belief is wrong, right? And obviously you're going to hell. So much so where it's like a lot of passive aggressiveness in it. And you find yourself being confronted with people who will actually celebrate your downfall because they're using that as evidence that because you didn't quite believe what they believed, you had that coming to you. And I'm looking at this like, oh, okay, so that's what that is. So yeah, that's just thought I'd put my little 2 cents out there.
Mo, you wanted to ask a question, or you had a comment?
No, we can move forward. You can go ahead and pivot with the next question.
Okay, cool. So one of the questions on our list, and I'm a little apprehensive to ask, but I'd like to go ahead anyway. So one of the questions is, who is Jesus Christ to you? And I would love to hear from everyone on the panel. I just, it doesn't have to be, a dissertation, but I'd love to have an answer because I have an answer, and I would love to hear from you guys.
What's your answer, Ray?
Oh, you want me to go first? So I struggle with the idea of Jesus because he's a figurehead, right? And just as I said earlier, many theologians, if we'll call them, actually not the theologians, just some of the religious folk, like to separate history from religion. And the story of Jesus was borrowed, if you will, from several other deities throughout history, some that predate Jesus by more than 5,000 years. So it's just a little bit difficult for me to accept. I accept his place in Christianity, right? I accept the who he is as a figurehead within that organized religion. However, when you have other deities, Mithra, Krishna, Dionysus, that were all born of a virgin, died and were raised 3 days later, and these are stories that have historical, relevance, and they predate Jesus by a lot. The story of Jesus is not his own, and that bothers me on a very, very fundamental level.
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Is it okay to speak? So, okay, so for me, right, on my journey for truth, you ran across a lot of information. This is what happens when you start to really seek, and you find out little facts like, Christ didn't really become the symbol of Christianity until 300 years after his death, during the reign of Emperor Constantine. This is 306 AD to 347 AD. This is documented. And then, if you're reading about Constantine, then you will run across the Council of Nicaea. Which they basically, there was a conflict going on in the region. And so this is according to historical texts. Okay. I can't recall it as accurately as I would like right now, but basically there was a conflict going on. And so the popular pagan religion at the time was actually merged with existing doctrine, which is where you get the story of Jesus's life, being sort of recounted again and merged with this New Age religion at the time. As for me, I personally believe that Jesus Christ was a real person. I believe that he was a great prophet. I believe that he got plenty notoriety where he was from, and I actually believe that he died for humanity. Now, do I believe it in the way that the traditional religious person may believe it? Maybe not, but I do believe that there's some truth there. But I think that the Catholic Church went through a lot of dead bodies to establish Christ as a deity. And that's my personal belief on the subject.
Not a lot, a whole lot of dead bodies. A whole lot of dead bodies.
Yeah. Oh, and just to piggyback of what we're talking about, the patriarchy. At that time, it was about the matriarchy. Women were believed to be, and personally, I still believe it. They are the closest things to God on this on this planet. They are literally the womb, the
Amen.
vessel by which new life enters into the world. So, if there's anybody who should be, standing up and talking about the spiritual aspect of creation, I think it should be, the woman. That's just my personal opinion. A little side note, but yeah, that's
Coming
where I
from
am.
a man's rib is bullshit, and I mean that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Women give life. Men contribute to it, but women, and that's another fundamental issue that I have is the idea, and that's just patriarchy in itself, is that men said that women came from them. That is asinine. But go ahead. I'm sorry. Mo.
Yeah, there's been a long campaign to paint women as lesser in religion, starting with the apple. Okay, no, I'm sorry, the fruit. They didn't necessarily specify the apple. Starting with the fruit, from the beginning, it's been a campaign to sort of degrade and make women feel, insignificant. Even I look at the story of Job sometimes, and when Job lost everything, they went through great lengths to name his sons. He had daughters too. Do they get a mention? And so I sit and I'm fascinated oftentimes that it seems that women go harder for Christianity than men, even though a lot of the things in the Bible are like I don't really want to say anti-woman outside of her serving the man. Or finding a good man, or what she has to do to find a good man. Basically, her existence is centered around the man in this patriarchal society we find ourselves in. But it's just observations I've made along my journey, and feel free to call me out if I'm wrong on anything. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Is there anyone else that wanted to take it?
Yeah,
Pastor, you got it.
No,
The floor is yours,
no,
baby. The floor is yours.
No, I won't. I won't go into it that deep, but I will say a number of things. Since my man Joe went back in history, one of the things that I do love is history. And one thing that you always learn in history, no matter if you're on the second grade level, like my son, I tell him now, history is always written by the winner. You never get the other side. You get the side that the winner wants you to know. And there are not enough losers to paint their narrative wide enough. So the original question, if I believe, is who was Jesus to us? Is that right? Yeah. So I mean, my stance is probably a little bit more traditional. I do believe that Jesus is the Son of God. I do believe he is our savior. And whether we like it or not, that's just where I personally fall with it. But when you speak about, the pagan religions and how convenient it is for one of their deities and Jesus to share the same birthday in the winter solstice, of course it does bring about those questions. And as a person who has gone to Rome, who stayed right next to the Pantheon, that visit St. Peter's Basilica, yeah, I got issues with the Catholic Church as it stands too. They I want to say, and I could be corrected, so but they truly believe in Mary as that deity, which I think will go along to much of what we were talking about, because it's not so much focused on Jesus, but the one that God intended to use to create this vessel and then birth this vessel that came to save the sins of the world. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of patriarchy that literally stems through the Bible. But it takes scholars, it takes theologians, not religious people. It takes all of them to properly parse both Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek. I'm fortunate enough that I can read a little bit of Greek, more than just the Greek alphabet. But say it again.
I said those Semitic languages.
Yeah, you gotta know how to go back and get that stuff and actually read it. If you are going to be one that's going to stand in front of people and try to rightly divide the word of truth. I'm not saying that you got to go to seminary to do it, but you need to pick up a book, more than just the Bible, and start to develop your own works of what you believe that this holy text that we call is saying. So.
Well, I know this conversation can go on for another hour or two all night for the rest of the week. But this was really great dialogue, and Ray and I are very appreciative of everybody's perspective. We kept it cordial, respectful, even with our difference in beliefs. And I think that's what's most important, to be able to have these controversial type of conversations and still be able to respect everybody else and where they're at when we have these type of conversations. So hats off to all of you for being able to have this conversation. And, my hope and prayer is that not only us, but those that have been watching walk away with something, whatever that is. My hope is that someone can take a seat from this conversation and continue to have these type of conversations amongst their friends and amongst their family, and really start to just really learn themselves and what their stance is when it comes to their relationship with the church, their relationship with God, with Jesus Christ, and the life that they want to live, whatever that looks like. So I am going to end this with one final question. Everybody doesn't have to answer if you don't want to, but I think it's a good question to just kind of end in the conversation. So my question for the group is, what is one thing that the church is doing well for our generation? And what is one thing that we would like to see the church do better? And I really want to pose the latter question to those that are not in the church, to hear your perspective on something that you feel as though would be important as far as a change that you would like to see when we think of the institution of the church.
I can jump right on in there. Me personally, I would like to see it as a community. One thing that I've noticed and that I grew up in and seeing is that we always have these churches and communities, but especially the pastors, the leads of the churches typically don't even live in those communities, right? So how could they even have a sentiment or a feel for that community as a whole? So we need to start coming together to definitely, build financial literacy, right? Take our land back. We need to start looking from that perspective, because church is a business. Let's be clear. We know it's a business. So treat it as such. Make sure that your people have the knowledge of the business and of the businesses around them, and start feeding back into where you're from and where you live. It's that simple. Start doing that, I might show up.
It's funny that you said that, Adrian, because that's actually the thing that I was gonna say my church is doing right. So in the midst of, I said offline, before some of you are here, that my church is about to have this big grand opening, and it's, welcome home to grace and whatnot. But like I said, it's a grand opening to this huge building, this community center, and the church is just the aspect within the community center. It's just a piece of it. And like my church's mission is like to the streets with it, and asking the community, what is it that you want from us? They've done extensive research, like pulling actual data. What do parents want to see? What are moms and dad needing? What are the families, like, what's going on? Like, what barriers are there in the community? And I feel like that is a missing piece, like you said. And I'm very proud of them for that, in the direction and the vision that they have. And it's not just, for the gaps like the financial literacy, it's from the mental health standpoint as well. Trying to help heal some of the trauma in our community, providing mentors. Like, I don't know, just what I feel like, church, and what I think of church, what it should be. So, yep.
So I'll repeat the question again for those that are watching that's just joining us and anybody on the panel that wants to answer. So the final question of the evening that we are posing to the group, and feel free to leave comments in the comment section on our page if you want to, add your feedback or your thoughts to this question as well. We definitely invite you to engage as well. But the question is, what is one thing that the church is doing well? Because we spend a lot of time talking about what the church isn't doing, but let's spend some time also talking about what the church is doing. So one thing that the church is doing well, and one thing that you would love to see the church do more of. So Marco, I don't know if you had a response or you need a second, but Marco and then Joe.
Yeah, what it's funny when I heard Adrian say about living in the community, because I do not live in the community where I pastor, but I do serve the community in where I pastor. So I think that's a delineation that needs to be made there. But one thing that I believe that our church is doing well is that we maximize the opportunity with the land that we had. Because last time I checked, I don't think God's creating any more land. So we have taken that business structure and began to buy the land and do well with what we have. And one of the things that we do is we have a daycare that subsidizes the cost of daycare for working families that can't afford to send their child to the more pricier daycares. But our daycare is not any less than those pricier daycares. We just make it more affordable. Another thing, it's currently here Central Time, 7:35. I have a gym currently full of probably about 50 young men that are being trained by former Division One athlete that played basketball for the University of Memphis. We also have an 18-bed transitional housing for women that does not just house them, but it teaches them job readiness skills and financial literacy. So those are some of the things that I believe our church in particular is doing well. And I would suggest to anyone that is looking for those things to just find the right church. There are a number of churches that are doing the right thing by their people. Before I moved to Memphis, I worked for a church that has 5,000 members, and we had Operation by the Block. Why? Because we were worshiping in a very gentrified neighborhood. So what did we do? All the people that were being moved out of their community, we built a three-story apartment complex and then had 57 townhomes. And then all of the people that were being moved out of the community, they were the first ones that had the opportunity to come back to the community, where they lived for years. And that's been a model that's been going around the city of Charlotte. And I will gladly say that we took the model from Detroit, Michigan. If you don't know who Reverend Dr. Charles Gilchrist Adams is, the Harvard Hooper himself, in Detroit, literally that church almost owns everything on 7 Mile. The AutoZone, the Wendy's, all of that. And all of that funnels into what they give back out to the community. And so those are some of the things that the church is doing well. We can do more of it. And I think some of us are doing more of it. But we don't, specifically at Early Grove, I'll say, we don't publicize everything, man. We ain't trying to get on the news. We ain't trying to be on CNN because we out there, champion this cause. No, man, we doing it for the good of the Binghamton community in Memphis. I tell them all the time, we go take care of missions. We go take care of foreign lands, but y'all, we got to take care of Binghamton first. And we do that by doing all of those activities that I just named. So, if you're looking for a church, continue to be on that quest until you find the one that is doing the right thing that you want to be done, or that you feel like the church should be doing. But if you're in Memphis, I would welcome you to come to 557 Lester Street, Memphis, Tennessee, where I have the pleasure of serving as the senior pastor.
There it is.
I love it. I think
you better do that, Marco. Reverend Dr. Marco.
I think Joe had something.
Well, I think the church does a good job. Just Christianity, period, right? and this is a disclaimer only for those who are at that place in their lives, but I think they do a good job of bringing people out of darkness, so to speak. And this is personally, there's a lot of Black men who may be prone to the street life and that type of thing, and especially particularly if they're raised in the church, they will find their way back to it. So I think it's good, to give people spiritual awareness, if you will. But I would have to agree with Adrian as well. I think that the church should do more with financial literacy, because I talk to a lot of people who maybe it's a misinterpretation of the scriptures, but scriptures like what good is it for a man to gain the world and lose his soul, and scriptures like it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. These types of scriptures subconsciously sort of teaches us that being wealth is evil. Like riches and wealth is synonymous with being evil with a lot of the religious people I've encountered in my life. And it's like, it's okay to have things and go to heaven too. Like you can do both. So, I think that the church needs to do a better job with encouraging, just Black economic wealth. Like your reward can be here too. It doesn't only have to be in heaven, so.
I just want to jump in right there before Jasmine goes.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Joe, the gospel according to John chapter 10, verse number 10. As you know, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. So I'm not out here telling you be broke. No,
yeah,
because outside of the church, there's a number of other businesses that I take care of. But yeah, the goal shouldn't be to be broke. Definitely should not be to be broke.
And so my thought was in line with that as we move from, prosperity gospel of, go to the Cadillac lot and lay your hand on the Escalade and, tomorrow it's going to be yours, but you got a 415 credit score. I do definitely think, and that is one of the things that in our church, we focus on the total man. And so one of those things is financial literacy. And I'll plug my sis because she's worked on my credit before, but her name is Letitia Holmes. She calls herself the bag lady. And that's one of the things that she does. She holds boot camps all around, but she's done them in church, in our church and other churches as well, teaching about about debt, budgeting, financing, your credit, all of that type of stuff. So really putting that into the church. We also really build up our entrepreneurs that are within our ministry. So like even this month, as part of our Black History celebration, we're having a pop-up shop of all of our Black entrepreneurs in our ministry. And I believe there were at least 26, if not more, businesses that we have within us. So that's just helping to show that, we can do things within and then build without as well. So I think it's just taking care of the total man as a whole, right? We can focus on spirituality, religion, and Bible thumping all day, but what good does all of that do if you still mentally, emotionally, physically sick? You know what I mean? We have to look at all of that. One of the things that I think, and I've talked about this before with a group of people, is just really seeing the church take back its place. And I don't want to say politics, but fighting for civil rights, right? Dr. King, when you look at SCLC and SNCC and all those different things, the church was right there. The meetings were in the church, the planning, the people were from the church. And I think we need to take that position back to really make effective change in all of our communities across the world.
Awesome. So I'll take it next. So I'm not in the church, so I can't speak to and won't speak to what the church is or isn't doing. One thing that I will say is for those that might be listening that are like me, I would encourage you to not despair, to not disparage the church, because I think it's important to understand that it represents something that's important for people that look like you. And a lot of times when we publicly ridicule things, it gives other people on the outside sort of a green light to do the same when they might not have the same backing or the same reasons that you may. So I just want you to be cautious in what you say, in what environments you say them in. The other thing that I will say that I would like to see from the church, and if this is something that the church is doing, I would like to see more partnership with those that are not a part of the church. And I think that's sort of the clandestine nature of religion in itself, is that it's us and then them. Whereas when you exist within these communities, and New York is a very special place because, you know, you have projects, $1 million condos, churches, and a bodega, right, all on the same block. So we're forced to be within the same communities as other people. So I lived in Crown Heights, Brooklyn for 5 years when I was here, and it's one of those places that's not just a melting pot, but there are two very distinct communities there. There are West Indian and Hasidic Jewish people, and those people have lived in harmony for generations. And during a lot of those Jewish religious holidays, you'll see those Jewish people out in the community talking to those Black people that are walking down the street. I'll never forget when I first moved here and I saw a Jewish guy blowing his horn, like a actual ram's horn, on the corner of Franklin Avenue and St. Mark's with a group of Black guys around him. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, right? Those people aren't going to be a part of the Jewish community, but they were still having a moment together because this is a community that we share. And so that's just something that I would like to see from the church, is even if someone doesn't necessarily want to be a part of your congregation, how can we work together, right, to uplift the community in which we both exist in?
I think for me, just to kind of close, what's important to me is when we talk about the next generation, I need to see the church do more for the next generation and to create a space where, you know, our youth and our teenagers specifically, I want to speak more so to the teenagers than the younger kids. I feel like churches, they have a lot of options for the little kiddos. But when it comes to reaching our middle school kids and our teenagers, I would like to see more churches have opportunities that bring them into the church. I know that that's something that I just even struggle with my teenager who's going to be 16. He has not grown up in a church that has really had anything for him. And so it makes it hard for him to want to be engaged in church because kids don't want to sit in the sanctuary and listen to the pastor. That's not what they want to do. They can't take in that information. And so then I think that pushes them away from the church. And that's something that I'm currently dealing with when it comes to my son. He doesn't have an interest in church. He doesn't know if he really believes in God because he hasn't been in spaces that really has catered to his age group. So I would like to see more opportunities within the church that really embraces the youth. And again, more specifically, the middle school and the high schoolers. I think we tend to forget about them. All right. Well, Ray, were you going to say something?
I wasn't. I was just gonna thank you for your comment. I don't have anything else. Just once again, I just want to thank the panel. I think the conversation was very enlightening and also very respectful. Again, like having differences of opinion doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be at odds. I think that a lot of times when people hear that someone doesn't believe, like Joe said, believe the same thing that they do, that they're enemies, and that's just not the case. I do appreciate that the men on the panel that don't necessarily believe or don't consider themselves religious do have some history and some knowledge of the things that they don't believe, which is not something that a lot of people do. You know, Joe quoting scripture, you know what I mean? Like, and that's good to see. Because I do feel like you have to delve into before you can say that you don't necessarily agree with something. So that's my final thought.
All right. Well, again, thank you to the panel. Thank you to those that joined the conversation in the chat, watched this whole hour and a half, almost 2 hours on this nice Thursday evening. We definitely appreciate all of you guys. And keep an eye out for another Mixed Company episode. I don't know when that'll be, but follow the page and just keep an eye out. And who knows, maybe something will pop up in another couple months. But we appreciate everybody. You all have a good night and be blessed.